All right, and welcome into the Fantasy Pros NFL Draft Show. We're talking tight ends today. That's right, we'll tell you everything you need to know from a Dynasty fantasy football perspective for tight ends 1 through 10 of the 2025 NFL Draft Class. I'm your host, Seth Woolcock, and today I'm joined by a man who has been knee-deep in this draft class for the past 3 months, Derek Brown, a.k.a. D-Bro. What's going on today, man? How are you feeling as we're officially less than 4 weeks away from that golden ticket out there in the NFL Draft?
Woof. We're getting closer and closer by the day, Seth, and all I see is I got some catching to do with prospect write-ups, baby. My top 100 will be live on the site before the clock strikes midnight, and the NFL Draft is here. So I think I'm somewhere in the 70s on full prospect write-ups for this class on skill players. Gonna get to the 100, but it's every day, man. You got to chip away at it. Only a few every single day. And I know as much as I've been in these streets, our guest today has been crushing it. And I don't want to belabor the point. I want to get to Theo here, but I know Theo has some massive news he's going to share with us on the show today about a possible new destination where he's going to be doing content and all the things. So I'll leave this to the guest, man. Theo Gremminger, one of the best in the space, baby. What's up, dude?
What's going on, D-Bro? What's up, Seth? Yeah, no, I'm excited to chop it up with you guys today. I guess we're official now where my content's going to be at Fantasy Points exclusively.
Let's go.
My Dynasty rankings, my rookie rankings, my podcast. You had a chance to come on Fantasy Football Daily with Brett Whitefield and I. I'm also doing the School of Scott over there, and Dynasty Life is coming over to Fantasy Points as well.
Oh,
so
nice.
Yeah, we're excited. It's a great team over there, and I'm really, really excited. It's like the first podcast I've gone on, guys, where I'm not talking about like being part of like 2 companies. So really excited about this one, and yeah, man, it's a big week for me, D-Bro, and excited to be here chopping up with you guys.
Dude, I'm so excited for you, man. I think it all goes back to supporting good people, and you're one of the best in the space. I mean, like, you and me getting a chance to hang out in person and stuff like that at multiple events, and really just to respect. I respect your content, respect your grind, and it's always good to see people continue to climb in the game and stuff like that. Good people doing good work, man. So shout out to you.
Appreciate that, D-Bro, and likewise to you as well, man.
Absolutely. And with you and Brett both at Fantasy Points now, I mean, is there going to be enough creatine to go around, Theo? Because this first time I met you, I haven't met you in person. I've met Brett a few times, and dude's an absolute unit. It feels like you're on that same path as he is in that area.
I would say if there was like a company-wide tag team wrestling event, I think Brett and I would hold it down. Big shout out to Cody Carpentier. Nobody wants to see Cody Carpentier in that either. I'll throw Cody in there.
Yes.
But Cody, Brett, and I think are the big 3 in the space. It's not a crazy high bar. Yeah. But yeah, I think we're there. We're there.
D-Bro, real quick before we jump in here, give me your tag team wrestling. Give me your 2 partners from Fantasy Pros. Who is it?
Oh, jeez. Well, first I'm actually going to go. Maybe people would be surprised to hear this. I'm going to go with the crafty veteran, dude. This guy has got moves. He will put you in a submission, the figure 4. I mean, choke you out. Pat Fitzmaurice, don't sleep on that man, okay? He is crafty as all get out, dude. So he's the first pick. And then, I mean, do you go with the wily veteran or do you go with the up-and-comer, man? I guess I need the sex appeal of Andrew Erickson. I mean, come on. You got to have a face. You got the crafty veteran. I mean, we got all the parts or pieces there. Although, shout out to Joey P, but I got to go with Erickson, man. I mean, nobody's got a better, like, shirtless flex game than Erickson here.
I got to say, if you're willing to rock a tank top on a podcast, like, Erickson will do that. So, yes, Erickson's all about that life. So, sun's out, guns out type guy.
Absolutely. Thanks for everyone so much who's been riding with us leading up to the NFL Draft. Whether that's on the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel where you can see Joey P, you can see Erickson, D-Bro smiling face nearly every day, or on the podcast feed, we greatly appreciate it. As always, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy this type of content. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're new. And before we dig into the top 10 tight ends, I did want to remind everyone that if you want to check out our consensus rookie rankings, our dynasty rankings, or the latest redraft fantasy football rankings, just head to fantasypros.com/rankings to get hooked up with the latest ECR for free. Again, that's fantasypros.com/rankings. You're going to get hooked up with our latest ECR for free. And gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump into the tight ends, starting with the man of the hour, the consensus tight end 1, Penn State's Tyler Warren. And I swear, whether it's been on these airwaves or over at IBT, I've been talking about this cat for the last 6 months nonstop. So I apologize if I've waxed poetically enough about him. I'm going to do it again. One of the top tight end seasons we've ever seen in college football history. Finished second in the country among all position in receptions with 104, seventh in receiving yards with 1,200 plus. Also added 200 yards on the ground as well. Penn State offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki deployed this guy everywhere, out wide, in the slot, in line, in the backfield, under center, in the wildcat, former high school quarterback. So he does have a little bit of an arm on him. Theo, being a Penn State fan, watching this guy carry the Nittany Lions to the college football semifinals, I'm all the way in on the John Mackey Award winner. Are you as well?
No, I think absolutely. And I think that the time he's coming into the NFL is perfect for Tyler Warren. You saw the immediate success of Brock Bowers. You've also seen the incredible target volume that Trey McBride's been able to handle,
Yes.
And the quick start for Sam Laporta. So I think NFL teams are more likely to utilize a player like this early on in their careers. Also, with the kind of draft capital he's going to get in the NFL draft, whether it's a top 10, whether it's a top 15, it's going to be somewhere in that ballpark. I think Tyler Warren has a chance to be a really, really fast starter. The stats were exceptional. The usage was exceptional. You made reference to the Wildcat QB and the manufactured rushing attempts that he had. And I will say that that's playing on the same team as a team that had 2 NFL prospects at running back. So like that can't get discounted. He has the yak ability. Tyler Warren, I think, is a instant top 5 tight end in Dynasty. And he could do that in terms of fantasy scoring this year as well, depending on the landing spot. I'm very, very high on Tyler Warren.
D-Bro, where are you at on Warren, and where would you take him in a non-tight end premium Dynasty rookie draft, Superflex format?
Big fan of Tyler Warren, man. Every time that I think about Tyler Warren, I just think about that GIF, and he's like, and he can pass too. I mean, then you talk about we talk about the Taysom Hill usage, but in the type of Brock Bowers, Jeremy Shockey type of body build. Like, this dude is a unit, man, a beast. Whether we want to talk about the rushing, the passing, we talk about the receiving, man. And I know people have kind of talked about the age and you know, him not like fully breaking out until his final season. I don't care about any of that crap. I just want to get out in front of that because I've heard it talked about, and age disparity between him and maybe Loveland and some of the players we're going to talk about in this show, but that doesn't matter to me at all. Like, he's not 27 years old. He's not 25.
Yeah.
None of that matters. I don't care if he didn't break out until his final season, because guess what? College offenses and what all that kind of looks like, quarterback play, all that kind of stuff. There's tons of context there. So that doesn't matter to me, especially even if you want to throw NIL and things like that for players and breakout ages nowadays and moving to different colleges. But Tyler Warren, the thing that I want to tell people out there is I think that looking at where he fits in the Dynasty landscape, I won't push back about him being top 5 in anybody's ranks.
Yeah.
I think the conversation for him starts at tight end 4, and where you want to put him after that is totally fine. But just to give this dude some more flowers, I mean, top 3 last year amongst all FBS tight ends with at least 20 targets in yards per route run, receiving grade, missed tackles forced, and yak. So we're discussing a plug and play 3-down tight end. And it's very different because we've had a few years and coaching staffs and all that kind of stuff. But the way that Penn State also utilized him, especially in the blocking department, really reminded me of Pat Freiermuth. Like, you're talking about a guy they used on pullers. They used him as the lead blocker in a lot of rushing plays, whether he's setting the edge or he's freaking clearing the road and mowing dudes down. Like, there are times on his film where you're like, dude, come on. That man has a family. Like, you just absolutely obliterated him. You separated his body from his soul. He's just left as like, well, I don't know if he's going to play any of the rest of the game because Tyler Warren just absolutely just removed him from the conversation. So a plug and play. And I think that even if you're looking at this class overall and him versus even Colston Loveland, he is the clear tight end 1 of this class in a tier by himself. I want to be very clear about that, because even when you discuss, and we're going to talk about Loveland next, Loveland might not be, and I think he can be, a 3-down tight end, but he doesn't have the skill set of Tyler Warren, dude. So let's not get it twisted.
I did want to say, too, about his age. This was like a national treasure hunt over the offseason, Theo. People were saying, oh, is this guy 25? Is he 24? We couldn't find any clear indication on how old he is. We did get that recently at the Combine. He is 22. He is 22, so still a bit older than some of the prospects. But does that really matter to you, Theo? Because breakout age is kind of a metric of the past, if you would, in the common modern NIL era.
Yeah, I think you got to put a lot of context with the breakout age for Tyler Warren as well, because he was playing alongside so many tight ends that are currently in the NFL.
Yep.
But I'll say that I think I'm a little higher on Colston Loveland than Debro is. I think he's a very worthy tight end too in this class. And I think the argument for Loveland is he's 2 years younger than Warren, so maybe there's a little bit more room to run in his development. And last year he had to play with such poor quality quarterback play at Michigan. But if we look at what he did on the national title team, he had 3 fewer receptions than Roman Wilson, and he had, I believe, about as many targets. So this is a guy that, despite being a low volume pass attack, this was their preferred target, along with the guy who was a 3rd round pick at wide receiver. So, like, for me, I think Loveland's going to also join Warren as an exceptionally drafted player. I think we see 2 tight ends drafted in the top 15 overall picks for the first time since 1992, Debro.
Yep,
I think Loveland's a guy there. And also I'll say, when it comes to Loveland, I do think he's a very good route runner. I think he's athletic. And I think, Debro, he will be a 3-down tight end. I think Loveland has big-time potential, but because it might be a year of development as opposed to Warren, I do think that rookie year production really, really matters. And Loveland would kind of have to thread the needle landing spot-wise to have the potential immediate role that Tyler Warren, I think, will have. That's sort of the break for me. But I will absolutely have Colston Loveland as a top 10 tight end in Dynasty right out the gate.
Debro, kind of on that note of Colston Loveland coming from Michigan, he is the tight end 2 in the consensus rankings right now. Really, really tough season for him in 2024. Theo already kind of mentioned it. They were playing musical chairs at quarterback, whether it was Davis Warren, whether that was Alex Orji under center. No one could really move the ball efficiently through the air for the Wolverines. Loveland still had a team high 56 receptions, nearly 600 yards, 5 touchdowns in just 10 games, kind of banged up in and out of the lineup. Still a consensus All-American, though. So, Debro, all signs are pointing towards Loveland coming off the board on day 1. Do you agree with Theo's assessment that this guy is a top 10 Dynasty tight end?
I think he's in the conversation for top 10, no doubt. Right now I've got him at tight end 11, but I think the conversation for him starts somewhere around tight end 7. In that tier, where do you want to, put Loveland? My thing about Loveland, and where I think there's a big divide between Loveland and Warren, is I think Loveland is more on the spectrum and could be for the usage in the NFL. I do worry because of his archetype and the player that he is. Would any of us be immensely surprised if Colston Loveland was Dalton Kincaid? Like, in the sense of he's shoved into a 60 to 65% route share instead of being in that 80, 85% and playing every single down. And that's kind of where I worry about what his absolute ceiling is. And it's not because he's not a good receiver. It's not because of that at all. But he still has growth as far as a blocker. Can he be a true 3-down tight end and really equate himself in the blocking? Or are we talking about a guy that's very much like Dalton Kincaid that is shoved into a 60 to 65% route share? And if that's the case, it's going to cap what his upside is, depending on his landing spot. So I like the talent of Loveland, and the metrics stand up for him. I mean, again, Loveland over the last 2 years has been top 10 in both seasons in receiving grade and yards per route run. You look at a player that has also in that span lined up in the slot or out wide on 56 to 68% of his snaps. And I just look at his game overall, and I have a few more questions just because while we all talk about, okay, he's a big wide receiver, not so much a tight end, I think that shows up in his metrics. And there are some concerns for me. Like, yes, he's a very good route runner. Yes, he can stretch the seam. Yes, he has speed. But the drawbacks for Loveland's game are, okay, we're worried about the 3-down usage as far as blocking. draft capital can probably help because if a team's investing in him, you hope, or some of that is the assumption of rational coaching, and they have a plan for him. But my worries about his game, because as much as we could talk about as good as a lot of his metrics are, okay, let's discuss the flip side of that coin. For a player that over the last, or at least in his collegiate career, only has 5.4 yards of the catch per reception. That is not a crazy number, especially if you want to talk about over the last 2 seasons. That's stuck at 5.2 in both years. And again, for a player that also enters the NFL with a 7.1% drop rate, higher than 10% in 2 of his 3 collegiate seasons, and he forced a grand total of 8 missed tackles in all of college. Of college. Only 8. So for a lot of parts or pieces to his game, and we want to break down usage, if he gets more of an Evan Ingram type of usage, low A dot, high volume, is he going to be able to maximize the low A dot stuff? Or is he really need to be like, we need to see a higher A dot used down the seam to really maximize his skill set? Because the collegiate profile and the film as well tells you he's not a guy that where you're talking about Tyler Warren, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, the top level, like truly top level guys that are not only doing all these parts or pieces, you could split them out wide. They got a lot of versatility as far as how you could use them and deploy them, but they can also create for themselves in the sense of, okay, fine, give him a 3-yard dump off, and he's going to put like stiff arm 2 dudes, break tackles, and add another 5 to 6 yards on top of that. That's not as much in Loveland's game as I think a lot of people talk about it. And I want to just also mention here, can everybody just please step back away from the Sam Laporta comps? Colston Loveland is not freaking Sam Laporta. They are not stylistically the same. They are not the same in analytics. They are not the same player. They are not close to being the same player. And I'm going to throw out my Loveland comp here because I haven't heard it in the space.
Okay.
And maybe people need to give a little more respect for a guy that you look at collegiate production, you look at what he did at the beginning of his NFL career. He could have had a monstrous NFL career. He just freaking got hurt. My comp for Colston Loveland is Dennis Pitta.
Ooh, that's a pull. That's a
going
pull.
Going a little back in the day on the Dennis Pitta one.
I mean, I like talented players, boys.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Colston Loveland, again, I think more highly of him than Debro does, and I think when it comes down to it, if he gets the sort of draft capital that I'm projecting for him, that's the kind of investment you put into a player that will be a top 2 target on your team. Right. And when it comes down to it, whether it's we can break down the profiles all we want, but for a tight end to really, really run for us in fantasy, they need to be a top 2 target on their team. Almost all of the guys that have fantasy success hit that criteria. If not, you're just an absolute freak like a George Kittle who might be able to, just kind of break the rules and score a bunch of touchdowns, get a bunch of yak. But when it comes to Loveland, I do think that he was dealt such a bad hand that it's really hard to kind of grade him. The national title team was just overwhelming people to the point where they didn't really have to pass in the second half.
Right.
And then this past year was the opposite extreme. The quarterback play was just so poor. Loveland's ADOT went down significantly, but he was still really the only show in town, led Michigan in all receiving categories, including targets, by a wide margin. So for me, I think Loveland, again, it's not a ready-made guy like Tyler Warren, but I think when we go to 2026, that might be more of a conversation about where he's at versus the field. So Loveland's going to have the necessary draft capital. He's got the necessary profile. He's got the size, Debro, a little taller than anticipated. He's actually taller than Warren, and I think he's going to get that opportunity. So if I'm taking a guy top 15, I'm not doing it to put him in like a Cole Kmet type role. Right. I'm doing it to put him in a featured type role. So I think Loveland's going to get there, but how quickly he gets there is the question for me.
Yeah, that's definitely fair with you. Go ahead, Seth.
Where would you guys draft both of these tight ends in Dynasty rookie drafts? For me, Tyler Warren, anywhere from that 106 to the 108 range, I'm cool with snagging him. Might be a little earlier than consensus. When it comes to Loveland, though, Theo, I'm right kind of in that, like anywhere from 201 to 206, I think you could make the case. Where do you stand on it?
So I think that question's a difficult one. I think if you're doing a pre-NFL draft, dynasty rookie draft, you might want to take the a little bit more of you want to take a little bit more of a conservative approach.
Okay.
I might push Loveland up to the 111-ish, 110, because I do think he's going to get that surefire draft capital. But the problem being with this class, there's going to be a running back monsoon where there's going to be so many guys where, let's say Bashal Tutin goes 43 overall to San Francisco, and you start seeing all these guys kind of just fall in place in round 2 and round 3 and early round 4. You're going to want access to those guys. But again, you're playing a little bit more of a guessing game. So I do think Loveland's going to get that premium draft capital. And therefore, if I want to take a conservative, kind of pragmatic approach with my early pre-NFL draft, dynasty rookie drafts, I'm comfortable pushing Loveland at like the 111, 112 area. But hey, man, we'll see after the NFL draft. You might be right. 201.
D-Bro, are you kind of in line there with Theo and his assessment of where he'd be taking these guys?
Yeah, I think looking at pre-NFL draft, because the big thing that's going to kind of push a lot of these guys around the board, and the thing that we don't know is what is the draft capital for the running backs after Amarion Hampton? Where do they go? Do they go?
Yeah.
Do any of them sneak in a round 2? Are they round 3? Are they round 4? What does that look like? As well as where do these tier 2 wide receivers go? Do they go second round, third round? Do they get landing spots? Things like that. I think talent alone, the conversation for Tyler Warren in tight end premium, depending on how premium that format is, starts. I think the conversation starts at the 105, 106. And for Colston Loveland, I think the conversation probably starts 108, 109, depending on what is depending on what format you're playing at. And because I think you want to lump in Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland into a conversation of Caleb Johnson, Travion Henderson, Emeka Ibuka, all these guys were Jaden Higgins, where it's do they go in round 2? Do they go in what is the landing spot? And how are we kind of parsing through all of that? So I'm pretty much in lockstep.
Mm-hmm.
This is a long way for me to say.
I'm
pretty much in lockstep with what Theo said.
Yeah, I don't do any pre-NFL draft rookie drafts anymore. I used to have a league where I did it.
You need to, Seth. At least one. It helps you feel alive, dude.
And look, dude, sometimes I'd come out with a Chase Brown, which I was really happy with in the 3rd or 4th round. But then sometimes I'm also going out there and just overdrafting people insanely. And like a Sean Tucker, I remember taking him in the back end of a 2nd round, and he goes undrafted. I'm like, oh, well, that was a waste of a top 24 pick. So it's dangerous. You're playing with fire a little bit, but it's still a good time. Also, by now, most of you have probably already heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it yet? It's time to go see what all the buzz is in the Dynasty community: free agency, multi-year contracts, rookie drafts, multi-year team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contract, and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. If you think it sounds complicated, it's really not. And the best thing about Reality Sports Online Fantasy Front Office is that it really takes no more time than a standard league. It just requires a bit more strategy. If you think you're among the fantasy elite, well, this is the platform to test your mettle. Still not sure? Test out your GM skills for free in a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use the promo code FANTASYPROS to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Again, that's promo code FANTASYPROS to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. At tight end 3, it's a big-time riser during the pre-draft process. LSU's Mason Taylor, son of Hall of Famer defensive end Jason Taylor. Taylor certainly didn't have the most productive career in Baton Rouge, totaling 129 receptions, a little over 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns in 3 seasons with the Tigers, but he has certainly flashed leading up to the NFL draft. Theo, what have you seen from Taylor throughout the process that has mock drafters now projecting him all the way up as a potential 2nd-round pick?
Yeah, I mean, I have him inside of round 2, and I think that's half the battle when we're looking at these guys is, can they be on the field right away, and can they be on the field the entire game? And when it comes to Mason Taylor, I think he's got the frame and the size that he's going to project to be a two-way tight end that can be effective as a blocker and also give you something as a receiver. Unlike Loveland and Warren, I don't ever necessarily foresee a scenario where Taylor is a top 2 target on an NFL team. But I think when it comes to Taylor, he's going to be an NFL starter. So depending on the format you play in, I think Taylor is a much more valuable piece for tight end premium dynasty managers than he necessarily is in a regular PPR format. But I mean, the guy's got the lineage. He's an absolute unit. He's only 20 years old. So he's a younger prospect.
Right.
And I think he's locked it in. He locked it in. I think he's a top 50 prospect. And when you start looking at some of those landing spots in the second round, I think also landing spots could matter a little bit more for Taylor. But I think 50 to Seattle, he's gone before that. Right, 50 to Seattle sort of the floor for me when it comes to Taylor.
What do you think, D-Bro?
Gosh, I just sound like I'm a hater on this show right now, considering Loveland and Mason Taylor. I've been below consensus on Mason Taylor. Right now, I've got him in my tier 3 of tight ends. Like, depending on the day, he kind of floats between tight end 4 to tight end 6. Depending on the draft capital, depending on the landing spot. I agree with a lot of what Theo did lay out there, though. I just don't see the ceiling for Mason Taylor. That's the problem. And you look at the analytical profile, it's not pretty, man. Like, I think the fact that he's Jason Taylor's son is carrying a lot of water for him. And, congrats. That's cool. That's great and grand. But you look at, okay, fine. Like, the RAS is 8.8. That's good. He went out and ran like a 4.68. It's about where I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be in the low 4.7s. So that doesn't really surprise me. But when you kind of dive into Mason Taylor's overall profile, like, we are still discussing a tight end that over the last 3 years has ranked 63rd, 99th, and 94th in yards per route run amongst all FBS tight ends every single season with at least 20 targets. None of those things are good. We're also discussing a tight end that in his collegiate career forced no more than 5 missed tackles in any collegiate season and produced only 5.4 yards at the catch per reception. And so you look at that, and then you look at the analytical profile, you look at the athletic testing. I think that he's going to be a solid tight end for an NFL franchise. I adamantly agree with Theo, though. He's never going to be probably the second option in a passing attack. If he does, it's probably like a Zach Ertz situation where like everybody else like dwindles away, gets hurt, things like that, and he's the last man standing. So I just don't see this immense ceiling. And so for me with Mason Taylor, I'll just let other people draft him in Dynasty. I think he's going to be a very, very solid NFL player. More of a guy that you're looking at just overall skill set and stuff. Like, I think he's going to be a very trusted weapon for an NFL offense, can beat its own coverage. But does he have the raw speed, the raw talent where you're going to be asking him to line up outside, to have the versatility to beat man coverage, press coverage, get the outside usage, get used down the seam religiously, stretch the field? I just don't see those things for Mason Taylor. So while I think he's going to be put it this way, I think the best way that I can tell people about Mason Taylor is I think he's going to be a much better player as far as NFL standards go and his production, his meaning to an NFL team than he is going to be in terms of a fantasy asset.
Yeah, you got to be patient with those tight ends too. Like, you got to make sure you're having a big taxi squad that you can kind of sit them. I know I took Ben Sinnott a lot last year, and I've kind of just been waiting for him to pop off. And you might have a similar trajectory for Mason Taylor, despite him probably seeing the field quite a bit earlier than someone like the Washington tight end did. Let's move on to Miami's Elijah Arroyo, who slots in at the tight end 4 after also having a great pre-draft process. If you've tuned into this program throughout the offseason, D-Bro initially put us onto this guy following the Senior Bowl, where he caught the attention of a ton of analysts, a ton of scouts. Despite Miami returning to national relevancy with the 10-3 season under Cam Ward, this 6'5", 250-pounder somewhat slipped through the cracks. Wasn't a big-time player in college football to the most casual fans, but he did break out to the tune of 35 receptions, 590 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Derek Brown, are you still high on the former 4-star recruit like you were earlier in the process?
I am. I think that Elijah Arroyo, right now in my rookie rankings, I have him at tight end 3. It's only him and Loveland in tier 2 for me in this rookie class. And do I care that he didn't test? No, I don't care about that. because you look at where Elijah Arroyo, he has crushed the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
He went out, had really good podium sessions at the combine. He absolutely, I mean, Theo and I were sitting in the stands in Mobile watching this dude just absolutely just moss guys in one-on-ones, in practice, in Mobile the entire freaking week. Like, he put on such a show in Mobile that I think Elijah Arroyo and his representation and stuff were telling him, like, look, dude, like, the rest of this process, whether it's film or what you did on Mobile, you've done enough. You've done enough to secure yourself as a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. So anything from this point on, including testing, you're probably not going to help your NFL prospects as far as your draft capital. You're probably more likely to hurt something if you go out and maybe guys like, whether it's miles per hour or film and stuff, maybe they got you as a 4.6 guy. Maybe you go out and you run a 4.7. Okay, well, that dings you down a few spots in the NFL draft. So I think a lot of this, what it comes down to is Elijah Arroyo didn't have a lot to gain left in the process. So he was like, screw this. I'm not going to hurt myself, because I think he was healthy enough at various spots to test. Like, talking to him at the combine, he was like, you know, people were like, oh, because at the combine, he apparently didn't work out because he said he was hurt or he was dinged up and stuff like that. But if you're standing there listening to the podium sessions, later in the podium session, he said, if this was a game day, I could play. And I was dealing with a bruise. And so it's like, dude, I'm not knocking you at all for not testing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that's the smart stuff. It's kind of like, shouldn't more agents be telling players this kind of stuff? Like, don't you think Xavier Restrepo would love to have that 40 time back and not have that uncorked for you know, the entire world to see, and hurting himself in the process? You know, not trying to like slam former Miami Hurricanes, but Elijah Arroyo, I think he's gonna be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. You look at the analytics, you look at his production and what he did in Mobile. Like, I think it's very telling. Like, for a guy that some of the production profile stuff also was hurt by the fact that he tore his ACL in 2022. So coming back in 2023, really breaking out in 2024, being top 24 in yards per route run, receiving grades, second in yak per reception, as a player that I think you look on film, I think that he's got 4.6 speed. Maybe if he slimmed down and he were to test, maybe 4.5. But I think this all goes back to, I think he is fast enough. He is a good route runner. I think he is a player that has enough to his game where you can move him out wide. You can ask him to get down the seam. You can stretch the field with Elijah Arroyo, for a player that, considering where a lot of people got him in Dynasty ranks, early ADP, I'm going to be drafting a lot of Elijah Arroyo this year.
Do you think he could also be a potential steal in Dynasty drafts, Theo?
Absolutely, because I think that the big two have sort of locked in their place, where I think there's always going to be a little bit of a gap in most rookie drafts between Arroyo and Loveland, or Arroyo and Warren, for that matter, if your league goes Loveland number one. But for me, I'm completely with D-Bro. Elijah Arroyo is the tight end 3, and he's probably in his own little mini tier, because this is a guy that projects to be a very strong fantasy football asset. He's big. He's very, very fast. And the people who have question marks about the speed because he didn't test at the combine or at Miami Pro Day, we have GPS data where he hit 21.5 plus last year, which is comparable to what Brock Bowers hit at Georgia. So I think when it comes down to it, I agree with D-Bro that if I had to like guess the 40-yard dash time, I'd say he's probably like a 4.6 flat, maybe a little sub of that. I mean, he was flying at the Senior Bowl, just flying.
Dude, nobody could stick with him. Linebackers, they put nickels on him, they put corners on him, and he's running past dudes, you know, after he scores in one-on-one drills, and then come on, Theo, for the rest of your life, 10 years from now, will you remember the moment when Elijah Arroyo took the football and said, pew, and he punted it into the stands on the last day?
100%. And Arroyo, like the Senior Bowl, there was an argument being made that he was the best player on offense in the entire Senior Bowl practices.
Yes.
So like Arroyo was absolutely up there, completely dominant. So, and I think that the Senior Bowl has been a great indicator when tight ends show up and they perform well at the Senior Bowl. It's usually reflective in the draft capital. Guys like Trey McBride. And I think that that's sort of, when you look at Arroyo, he can make plays downfield. He's very fast. He also is the kind of player with his versatility as a route runner. You can move him into the slot, and I think he could excel there. So I think that he fits a number of landing spots as well, where he's not like pigeonholed into I'm looking for this sort of a tight end.
Sure.
I think that he could land on multiple teams and still overcome most starting tight ends and take over. We would really like a clear path for Elijah Arroyo where he lands on a team without an established tight end. But even if he lands on one with a middling tight end, I'm still going to try to get access to him in my Dynasty rookie drafts. He's sort of the arbitrage play to the big two where I get a guy in the second round in tight end premium that could really excel as a fantasy asset. So I've been high on Elijah Arroyo for a while, just like Debro. It's really hard not to, if you were at the Senior Bowl in person, not to walk away extremely impressed by him.
Dude, that I love the fact that you brought up the arbitrage play. To me, if I was an NFL general manager, why am I going to draft Tyler Warren and Loveland, or especially Colston Loveland in round 1, when I can go back and I can just get Elijah Arroyo in round 2? Like, comparable skill sets, going to be a pass game weapon. I think, and maybe this is my hot take or whatever, but like, I don't think the division between Colston Loveland and Elijah Arroyo should be as wide in a lot of conversations as it is and as it's being discussed. Like, again, I have these guys in the same tier.
Okay. And I think it's really important, the point that Theo made about seeing him in person at the Senior Bowl. And I know we got a comment in one of our last videos asking, like, why do we take so much stock into the Senior Bowl? One, like, it's great to have boots on the ground. Derek, you got to see these guys in person. And also, like, we're removing so many of these external X factors, right? The coaching, the personnel on the field, the competition they're playing against. At the Senior Bowl, you kind of get to remove a lot of those X factors and variables, and you kind of get to see it with their own eyes. And I thought, like, the entire internet got to see Arroyo and what he did there. So love that, guys. Let's keep it moving here. I said earlier in the program that Tyler Warren might have had the best college football season ever for a tight end. And if he didn't, well, then Bowling Green's Harold Fannin Jr. sure did, man. Top 100 player coming into the season. He finished as a consensus All-American, the MAC Offensive Player of the Year, led the MAC and the country in receptions with 117, also led the country in receiving yards among all positions with over 1,500 as well. I know people like to take shots at the MAC, but when it comes to playing top competition, he also proved to be an absolute stud against my Penn State and Indy Lions in week 2, a little bit of a nail-biter game. He went 11 for 137 and 1. Plays Texas A&M their next game 2 weeks later in week 4, 8 for 145 and 1 against one of the SEC's top defenses. That said, Theo, there are real concerns about his size. He is just 6'3", 241 pounds, and the speed as well is in question after running a 4.71 second 40-yard dash. Where do you slot in Fannin currently?
So I'm still pre-NFL draft going to keep Harold Fannin as my tight end 4.
Okay.
I think when it comes to the NFL draft is really going to be sort of my guide when it comes to Fannin. And I know there's been tight ends that have hit on coming out of day 3. There's been many of them, but I would rather see an NFL team say, with this sort of production as a collegiate, I'm going to use a 3rd round pick on him. If he goes in that sort of range, I think we should be fully back. But if he ends up dropping to like the 5th round, with the athletic profile not being quite where we wanted it to, in sort of this tweener profile, I think we have to let the NFL sort of be our guide there. But when it comes down to it, 4 yards per route run, and he also had 120 yards per game, which is just ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah.
So Fannin's production, incredible. You brought up how he was super productive against the 2 best teams on his schedule.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's just there's more athletic options at tight end, and I'm worried that NFL teams are going to draft those players. Putting Fannin Jr. and in a day 3 draft capital would not be the sort of scenario that I'd like to see for him. This sort of production should merit a day 2 pick. If an NFL team does it, then I'm there. If not, I do worry about the tweener aspect. He's 240 pounds on the nose, and that was, bulking up for the combine. 4'7", 240. It's not really going to propel him athletically when you compare him to guys like Arroyo, guys like Terrance Ferguson, Rondé Gadsden. So that's my only concern. But production-wise, the tape is great, and the actual on-field production was silly.
Your thoughts, Derek?
Yeah, I'm more worried about Fannin for a lot of the reasons that Theo threw out there. I mean, I feel like we're doing the sexier version of Jaheim Bell again. Because we a lot of people said
love
this.
Jaheim Bell, man. That was my guy.
Dude, but the other part about this is we can look in recent history, and I'm not saying that the guy had similar production, like where he was putting up legendary numbers, but another guy that was extremely productive at a small school came out, and he's actually my comp for him, Isaiah Likely. And the NFL told us with Isaiah Likely, now Isaiah Likely wasn't as athletic as Harold Fannin, so again, maybe he falls in between this, but the NFL told us Isaiah Likely was a 4th-round pick. I can't rule out that they're going to tell us the same thing for Harold Fannin. Maybe he gets a little more love because of the legendary production. And, we know NFL teams, I'm not going to say they double count everything, but some of the things do get double counted in some of those draft rooms.
Yeah.
And so I just worry that he falls somewhere in the spectrum of Isaiah Likely and Jaheim Bell, and he goes in round 4 of the NFL draft. And again, we're talking about the position specifically, getting more into the fantasy stuff, the most highly correlated position to fantasy success and production and elite production with tight ends is freaking athleticism.
Yeah.
And then Harold Fannin went out there and showed us he's an okay athlete, but not a special athlete. So even in the best cases of circumstances, even guys in this production, like profile, this phylum of these tweener guys, even guys with alien type of athleticism. Yes, Mike Gesicki, I'm looking at you. We've seen them struggle to get a foothold consistently in the NFL year after year after year. Now, has Gesicki fallen backwards into some very productive seasons? Sure. We also can't talk about the fact that and discuss it like there haven't been pitfalls and potholes along the way.
Sure.
And with Fannin, I think a lot of, not only outside of the insane production, which we could talk about that for days for a player that, I mean, dude, over the last 2 years, he ranked no lower than 5th in yards per route run, receiving grade, or missed tackles forced.
Wow.
So that is definitely there. But again, going back to the tweener profile, last year, this guy lined up in the slaughter out wide 70% of his snaps. Do we think that for a 4.7 guy, for a guy that walked away with a 7.7 RAS, who didn't test any higher than the 79th percentile in the 40, the 10-yard split, 20-yard split, vert, broad, any of those spots, do we think that he is definitively going to get high-end draft capital and a team is going to force and carve out a role for him? That's the hard parts of his profile that I don't know if it happens, man. There's other guys. We talked about arbitrage plays in this tight end class. There's some guys we're going to talk about later where I'm like, if you want that type of archetype, yeah, sure. Maybe they don't come with the sexy collegiate production, the legendary counting stats.
Right.
But what they're able to put on the field as far as talent, usage, product, like, why are you going to draft a Harold Fannin in the 3rd or 4th round when some of these tight ends, I'm staring at you, Rondé Gadsden, where you can get a similar type of profile later in the draft. So for me, I don't think the draft capital is going to be there. If it is, then fine. I'll push him up a little bit. But right now, as it stands and where I project his current NFL draft capital, I'm just not that high on Harold Fannin for all the parts or pieces. Like right now, he's my tight end 7 in this class. He's behind Terrance Ferguson, Mason Taylor, and another guy we're going to discuss later, where I'm just like, I don't think it happens, man. But again, getting back to it, I've got him in the same exact tier as a Rondé Gadsden.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep it moving here. We'll go a little quicker through the bottom of these tight ends on the board. At tight end 6, it's Texas Longhorn Gunnar Helm. This is another John Mackey Award semifinalist. He led Texas in receptions this season with 60 of them, added nearly 800 yards, 7 trips to pay dirt. In his first full season as a starter, keep in mind Jatavion Sanders was the starting tight end for Sark in that offense before he went to the NFL. D-Bro, you had him as your number 1 prospect with something to prove at the NFL Combine. And man, he did anything but that. Allegedly sprained his ankle while running his first 40, and his testing was an absolute nightmare. 4.84 second 40-yard dash, 1.69 second 10-yard dash, last among tight ends, 30-inch vertical, last among tight ends as well. Derek, is Helm off your board after an ugly performance at Indy, or you give him the benefit of the doubt that he allegedly hurt his ankle?
So considering we saw the pictures and his ankle ballooned up right afterwards, I do believe that was real, and I do believe it affected his testing, because And Andrew Erickson, if he was on this show, can attest to this. After Helm tested and ran, I was staring at Erickson and I was like, he's faster than that. Like, I don't know what the heck just happened out there and what that wet fart of testing was, but he is faster than that. He's better than that. And I think it shows up in his film. And I'm not telling you Gunnar Helm is a burner. Like, I don't think he has 4.5 speed. I do believe that he has 4.7 speed. And I do think that it shows up on his film, and I think he's fast enough. And for me, the coffin nail for fantasy production and just guys that you're off my board, if you run a 4.8 or higher, you are considerably definitively off my board. Now, given the context of what happened to Helm at the testing, and as well as because we are also past the Texas Pro Day, and Gunnar Helm was not able to test at the Texas Pro Day because he was still not 100%. So I think all of that does need to be used as context for the horrible testing numbers that he put out there. So for me, I'm throwing the testing numbers in the trash for a player that when it was first announced, we first saw him run and stuff like that, he was off my board. Going back, now that we have the context of that, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense that I think that he's faster than that. You look at the production profile that he put up at Texas last year, he did, and he was able to stretch the seam. He can get downtown when you need him to. He is a very physical player. He can break freaking tackles. He is a my ball winner at the catch point. I mean, we're discussing a player that last year, amongst all FBS tight ends with 20 more targets, 6th in missed tackles force, 3rd in yak. So I think if all of this comes down to, I think Helm probably goes in maybe round 4 of the NFL draft. And I think because of the testing and stuff like that, he is probably going to be a fantastic value in dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah. I think with Helm, it's what would the narrative be, Debro, if he just was injured for the NFL Combine and wasn't able to participate?
Yep.
And it's sort of like what you see is what you get as a prospect. I think round 4 for him, that's fine. And I agree with you that depending on the landing spot and depending on the draft capital, if he gets sort of the Jatavian Sanders-ish draft capital, I think it's fine to take him as a discount. Certainly when you watched him at Texas, you didn't think he was slow. The yak ability is really the I think his best attribute for the NFL level. He's like a dog with the ball in his hands, physical player. So again, I think this is like a fake slow number. I'll take that. And I think that what's interesting is you bring up the production he had, and he did so alongside other guys that are going to get drafted by the NFL pretty highly. So definitely you get a discount with Helm. I think this is, instead of having to say, do I have to take him as the tight end 5 in order to get some access to my dynasty rookie drafts? I'm going to be able to take him as like the tight end 9 potentially.
Right. Yep.
And then just take a shot and see where it goes.
Don't
Theo,
forget.
good point of context on that too, man. Like, because I think just last little point on Helm. The good point of context with all of that stuff and just looking at the Texas roster last year, and we got all that word that Quinn Ewers was hurt for most of the season. Isaiah Bond was hurt for part of the season. So really you're looking at, okay, well, Gunnar Helm playing along really, really talented players. When you step up into a higher position in an offense and you demand targets, and I know that Quinn Ewers was not 100%, but still demanding targets and doing something with that volume alongside other talented players, even if they are less than 100%, you still have to get open. You still have to, like, targets are earned. That is immensely true. And Gunnar Helm did that while playing alongside other guys. Now we can, again, parse through their health at certain parts of the season, but still to say that if he wasn't a talented player, that he wouldn't have earned that type of target share, even if they were hurt, then we would have seen like 15 targets from Matthew Golden every damn week, but we didn't see that. So that's a reflection of Helm's talent.
Let's also not forget this Texas offensive line with Helm in line was one of the best run blocking teams in the entire country, man. I mean, they were mowing people down at the end of the season. Trey Wisner, Jaden Blue in the backfield were having explosive runs, and I think this guy's a better blocker than we're giving him credit for as well. So that's my only thought on him there. Real quick, I did want to remind everyone about our Dynasty Rookie Draft Simulator that lets you complete a mock draft in minutes with no waiting between picks. You can customize your league settings to match your league's exact formats. And also, if you're a premium subscriber, you can test trade scenarios by mocking with your traded draft picks. I always am trading draft picks, so that's something I have to have. I had to make sure I was a premium sub long before I worked here. And prepare for your rookie drafts and dynasty startup drafts in one place. Use the Dynasty Rookie Draft Simulator to dominate your rookie draft today at fantasypros.com/simulator. Next up is Oregon tight end Terrance Ferguson, former 4-star recruit. That was a very reliable pass catcher in Dan Lanning's offense in Eugene since the moment he got out there. In his career, he totaled over 130 receptions, 1,500 yards, 16 touchdowns, the most touchdowns by an Oregon tight end in program history. Ferguson was also one of the true stars at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. 4.63 second 40-yard dash, first among tight ends. Also finished first with the 10-yard split and the vertical, and third in the broad jump at the position. 9.81 RAS, best among the tight end position by a country mile. Theo, where do you stand on Fergie following a huge performance at Lucas Oil a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Terrance Ferguson, much like with Mason Taylor, like with Elijah Arroyo, I think we're talking about a tight end who's put himself in position to be a second-round pick. So I think Ferguson is going to get that Luke Musgrave-like draft capital. And I think that Ferguson is a guy where you brought up the 40-yard dash time. Certainly a overly athletic tight end at a position where athleticism matters more than any in fantasy. So Ferguson really was a guy where he also benefited from the fact that there was a number of disappointments at the combine and a lot of guys sitting out. So we had the disappointment from Helm. We had certainly slight disappointment from Harold Fannin, and we had guys that were missing. So Ferguson kind of grabbed the bull by the horns and was the tight end winner at the combine. I think that you're going to end up seeing him pushed into that round 2 draft capital. He's got a basketball build. He's not a blocker, but he's a move tight end, athletic tight end, where if an NFL team drafts him and wants to make him part of their passing game, I think he could be a guy who provides sort of high-end tight end 2 production. What's the ceiling for Ferguson? Do I think Ferguson is a guy who could really, really run and be a tight end 1 consistently? Not sure, but I do think he's a guy who's a starting tight end in the NFL that's going to have his moments fantasy-wise.
How do you feel about Debro?
I think he's in that same type of archetype as Harold Fannin and Ronnie Gadsden and all these guys. I mean, Ferguson lined up in the slot or out wide on 57.7 to 74% of his snaps, depending on the year, in his final 3 collegiate seasons. Now, again, I don't think he's very developed as a route runner, a guy that we receive. If you go watch his film, I mean, he was used underneath versus zone coverage, extremely fluid athlete. I was surprised how well he tested. And looking at that athleticism, I don't know if he goes in round 2 where Theo's at. I think he's probably a round 3 pick for me, or where he goes in the NFL draft. But again, we're kind of splitting hairs with all of that. We look at the profile, we look at the athleticism. Again, depending on landing spots and stuff, I know in our most recent 3-round mock draft for Fantasy Pros, I put Ferguson going 3rd round to Cleveland as the heir apparent to David Njoku, which I could definitively see. But Ferguson, a lot of things line up for me where I'm much higher on him exiting the combine and for the rest of the process than I was entering it. Considering the testing, for his final season, Seth, 14th in yards per route run, 3rd in yak per reception. You marry all of that with the testing and probably better NFL draft capital than, we were talking about before.
Right.
Yeah. Again, if we're going to take swings on this pass catching first, we have questions about, can they be a 3-down tight end? I mean, this is one of the guys you take the swings on, except, when we're comparing and we're splitting hairs versus him, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, he's actually super freaking athletic, whereas we've got a lot of questions about some other guys.
Certainly. Let's go ahead and meet tight end 8, Notre Dame's Mitchell Evans. In his final 2 seasons in South Bend, Evans averaged 36 receptions, over 400 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not crazy numbers by any means, but he was a key cog in this Irish run to the national championship game in 2024. Evans did not have an amazing combine by any means as well. He still finished with an 8.95 RAS, though. That said, Debro, where do you think Evans lands in the NFL draft and Dynasty rookie drafts?
Dude, he is so interesting, and I'll say this: I got to his tape and everything late in the process, like prepping for this show.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't gotten to Mitchell Evans up until that point, but his entire, like, his analytical profile and stuff, I think is extremely interesting, considering he looked like he was on the way to a monster breakout season in 2023. And unfortunately, it was derailed by tearing his ACL in 2023 and what that did to his 2024 season. So you look at, like, just the abbreviated 2023 season. In 8 games, this guy had 422 receiving yards. In 5 of those 8 games, he had 61 or more receiving yards. His ADOT, and looking at usage again, from one season to the next, in 2023, we're talking about a player that, like, he got downtown, got down the seam, 10.2 ADOT. That dropped to 6.7 in 2024. And as well, you're talking about effectiveness and his raw athleticism being hampered by coming off of the ACL. This is a player in 2023, boys, that was 6th in yards per route run, 7th in receiving grade, was trending towards really exciting numbers. Mm-hmm. And we want to talk about, okay, what was the context of the Notre Dame offense? Okay, are we really thinking Riley Leonard is an accurate quarterback?
Or Sam Hartman before that too, yeah.
Fair. And I think Mitchell Evans, again, if we're talking about all these different tight ends, he's kind of this black box guy that I think maybe he's a little more athletic than he was able to test, considering still, coming off the ACL. Is he going to be faster, stronger, again, going into year 2 post ACL in the NFL? And looking at what his analytical profile looks like, and then you marry all of that with the film, he's not the most explosive athlete, but I do think that he's got enough speed to stretch the field, to get down the seam. Mm-hmm. I think that he's more of a guy we're going to ask to operate versus zone coverage than being a true weapon and splitting him out wide. He does show a little bit of ability to produce yak and break tackle. So again, looking at all of these guys and parsing through it, I'm higher than consensus on Mitchell Evans, because I think that if we would have seen a fully healthy version of him for 2023,
sure,
and the numbers he would have put up, I think we would be discussing him, and the NFL would be discussing him in a very, very different light than what's happening currently. So depending on the day, he floats anywhere from my tight end 4 to like my tight end 6 in this class. And I do have him above Harold Fannin.
Theo, where do you land on Mitchell Evans? Because people like to say that Notre Dame is tight end U. We know they sometimes get overdrafted, whether it's Cole Kmet, Michael Mayer a couple years ago as well. I would argue either Iowa or Penn State are tight end U, but at the same time, that aside, where are you at on the Notre Dame prospect?
Let's not get it twisted. Iowa is tight end U. Okay,
it's funny.
We've got like 10 starters in the NFL right now.
Iowa is tight end U.
I said tongue in cheek that Penn State is the new tight end U one time on like a podcast, and the Iowa people, they do not like it if you don't give them their props on tight end U, which they've actually really, really earned. But sheer volume, Penn State's the volume tight end.
Yeah.
So I mean, Evans for me probably in that tight end 8 through 11 range. I think he's a day 3 pick.
Okay.
I agree with Debro that pre-injury there was a lot more room to run out of that profile in the production. The ADOT went way down post-injury. So for me, Evans was a productive player at Notre Dame. He's got size. He's not particularly overly athletic. Probably projects to me more as like a tight end 2. And for some teams, he'll be on the field a lot. Would have to kind of hit the right landing spot to end up being a starter by his second year in the league. But I don't think him being a starting tight end in the NFL is out of the question.
Okay. We've got 2 tight end prospects left to cover, starting with Georgia Tech's Jackson Hawes, transferred from Yale, Ivy Leaguer this past season. Only really had modest numbers for the Yellow Jackets, 15 receptions, 195 yards, no scores. However, he was a key blocker in their run-heavy offense led by dual threat quarterback Haynes King. Theo, is a blocking tight end how you project Hawes for the next level, and therefore is he off your Dynasty rookie draft board?
Yeah, Jackson Hawes will not be somebody that I'm targeting unless it's for my points per block league. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to produce too much for fantasy football. Yeah. I'd rather talk about Oronde Gadsden. I want to hear Debro talking a little Gadsden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't play in many PPPs, points per pancake leagues. So unfortunately, we don't do that. But I agree with Theo. Like, I think Hawes is going to be a non-factor for fantasy.
Yeah.
he's going to be a guy that makes his money based off of blocking, based off of being a 12 personnel inline kind of guy, and the profile matches up with that.
Those boys get paid now too, though.
They do. They
Josh
do.
Oliver?
I mean, make your money, baby.
Yeah.
I'm totally with it. But for fantasy,
Yeah. Let's go ahead. We'll get to some honorable mentions, but first I did want to talk about Jake Briningstool from Clemson. Standing at 6'6", Jake the Snake went for 99 receptions, north of 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons in Dabo Sweeney's offense. Didn't have the best combine, though. Ran a 4.75 second 40-yard dash, posted a 6.3 relative athletic score. D-Bro, where are you on this lanky fella in your rankings?
You can miss me with any Briningstool hype, hope, anything like that.
Got a great head of lettuce, though. Great head of lettuce.
He does. He's a pretty man, so shout out to him. Hope he has a very long, productive career from the commentating booth. But I just don't see, I don't see it for fantasy-wise and, high-end production in the NFL. You can look through his entire collegiate analytical profile, 59th, 66th, 57th in yards per route run over the last few years. I think he's going to be a guy that sticks around, has a good NFL career, probably as a tight end 2, tight end 3 on a lot of NFL rosters. I mean, he's really... Looking at his profile, he's one of those guys, he's good at a lot of different things, but he's not great at anything.
Theo, where do you land on him? Because Clemson with Cade Klubnik was definitely one of the higher passing volume teams in college football this past season. So I feel like that kind of leads to this production that is a lot better than some prospects in this class, but not still overwhelming by any means.
Yes, I know he was a really big recruit for Clemson, and I think sometimes those guys that were names that were known for Devy players sort of hang around a little bit longer. Unless you're in an exceedingly deep format, I don't think he's going to be a guy that you're going to have to worry too much about for fantasy. Those guys have to thread the needle. Maybe he has a season or two where he gets tight end fantasy relevant because of an injury ahead of him. But at the end of the day, you're talking about a guy who's going to be drafted on day 3, and he's relatively unathletic at a position where we really need to chase athleticism more and more. So he's probably off my list in pretty much every format.
Okay, let's round it out here. Some honorable mentions. We didn't mention him we did mention him by name, but not purposely. Rondé Gadsden coming out of Syracuse. He had a big season. Benjamin Uzuric, he's coming out of Georgia. Some people like him. If you believe Iowa is tight end U, Luke Latchley coming out of there as well. Thomas Fedona out of Nebraska. D-Bro, give me one or two of these names that are someone you're circling as a sleeper at the tight end position for Dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah, Theo hit the nail on the head here. Rondé Gadsden, I think, again, we're looking at arbitrage plays. He's the arbitrage play off of Harold Fannin, a guy that was incredibly productive in college. 2022, 2023 was 18th and 5th in yards per route run. Now, his 2023 season was cut short by Liz Frank, but this is a player that I think you're looking at the more athletic version of Harold Fannin. Didn't have the counting stats as far as receiving, but honestly, he's kind of like the Harold Fannin, but we've got a little bit more utility and proof of concept with him as a blocker. Gadsden in his final season at Syracuse had 32.6% of his snaps in line. And while I don't think that he's just a people mover, just an amazing blocker, but you look at the receiving utility, the ability to get down the seam, and what he can do in the vertical passing game, and you marry that with the ability that we do have somewhat of a proof of concept, and I think that he's a little bit better as a run blocker. You shouldn't be asking him to toe the line and be awesome in pass protection, but can he be good enough to be a 3-down tight end and honestly be what everybody wants Harold Fannin to be? Yeah, I think Gadsden can be, but I'm curious where Theo is at on him.
No, I'm completely with you. For me, he's tight end 7 because his profile projects very well for fantasy football. When it comes to Rondé Gadsden, you bring up the production, over 70 catches, over almost 900 plus receiving yards. And this is a guy that had a ton of air yards, had over 100 targets at the tight end position in the ACC. So for me, Gadsden, just as a general rule for us in fantasy football, anytime we hear that a tight end might be viewed as a wide receiver at the next level, and we have questions about their positional eligibility, and actually goes to the tie goes to the tight end position, we want to take note of those guys, because think about how many larger wide receivers when we're watching and they're fantasy production is really not great. We're like, can't they just move him to tight end, give him tight end eligibility? We've got that in Arrondé Gadsden. He's sort of an overgrown wide receiver playing tight end. And if that sort of player lands correctly with that athleticism and that sort of receiving profile, then you're talking about a guy who can give you tight end one production. So I think he's super exciting, and he will be cheaper in these drafts than certainly some of the guys we're talking about. I think he's going to go behind Terrance Ferguson in terms of draft capital. I think that's a safe bet. But if Arrondé Gadsden's a late round 3, but I think more likely round 4 pick, but he lands well, then that's a guy that I'm very, very interested in.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Anyone else you want to shout out? D-Bro is an honorable mention.
Yeah, the only guy we'll bring up here is Thomas Fadone. And again, another guy that I really think acquitted himself well in Mobile. For a player, if you're just looking at the analytical profile, it's not amazing as far as any type of metric or numbers that I can throw at you and stuff like that. But this wasn't a pass-heavy offense that he's coming from in college. I think he acquitted himself well in Mobile and showed out for a player that I didn't get a chance to find any All-22 on him prior to getting to Mobile.
Okay.
So to see him on the field in the one-on-ones, and I mean, the dude he's a freaking gazelle. All you see is legs with this guy. High cut runner, galloping across the middle of the field, a player that you can use on crossers and tested better than I think a lot of people would have thought, like a 9.4 RAS, 83rd percentile or higher in the vert, the broad, the shuttle, and the 3-cone. As well as he's got inline chops. Fadone could be a guy that I don't think that he goes high in the NFL draft, but a player that I think we should be circling, especially for Dynasty rookie drafts and in tight end premium formats. I will be stashing him on a ton of taxi squads.
Anyone else for your Theo?
I think Jalen Conyers out of Texas Tech is interesting just because he's really, really athletic. Yeah, and again, I'm going to prioritize athleticism when I'm sort of chasing waterfalls on like late tight ends. Conyers at I think a 9.25 RAS score. He's 260 pounds. He can run. So I think he's interesting. But I think that the Fadone was another guy we liked at the Senior Bowl. He really shined at the Senior Bowl. He has like a very interesting size to him. Again, like a really lanky guy, runs kind of differently, but he had a little shake to him. So I think he's an interesting one, D-Bro. I'm glad you brought him up.
I absolutely love that you did your best Michael Keaton and had the TLC reference there, Theo.
Don't go chasing waterfalls. Don't do it, bro.
Everybody that didn't catch it. That was sort of the best part of the other guys are like, dude, what? Does nobody else see what he's doing? What are you talking about? I don't know.
And so he could creep. He creeped as well.
Theo, thanks so much for joining us today, man. Can you let the Fantasy Pros family know how they can best find and support your work throughout the remainder of the NFL draft process and as we approach the 2025 NFL season?
Yeah, so you can find all my work over at Fantasy Points. D-Bro joined Brett Whitefield and I for Fantasy Football Daily. Also, Dynasty Life coming over to Fantasy Points as well. Make sure you subscribe to that. And School of Scott, I do that with Scott Barrett. We're going to be doing an FFPC high-stakes draft review, talking about some early ADP. We should be recording a episode this week. But Pat Fitzmaurice was also on Dynasty Life recently. So D-Bro recorded with me. Pat recorded with me. So shout out to everything you guys do over here.
Awesome. Well, I love it. D-Bro, thank you for joining us today as well. That is going to do it for us on the Fantasy Pros NFL Draft Show. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back next week with our favorite NFL draft sleepers. D-Bro and I will also be live on the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel on Monday, April 7th, taking your NFL draft and dynasty questions. So make sure you ring that bell so you don't miss it. Also, please, again, like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel and the podcast feed. For Derek Brown and Theo Gremminger, I'm Seth Woolcock. Take care, y'all.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football Podcast. If you love the show, the best free way to support us is by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Fantasy Pros, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros.